Trigger warning: racism, sexism, transphobia, rape, and other topics. If you are uncomfortable with them, please don't watch this. Viewer discretion is advised. Prelude: if you don't know me, I'll let you know right off the bat that I'm anti-racism, anti-sexism, and anti-transphobia. Basically, I am anti-bigotry. However, according to some bigots, I am not just racist and sexist, but the embodiment of racism and sexism. The comment, I was unable to find it, but I remembered, as I'm pretty good at holding on to stupid shit people say. The comment has been deleted by now, but it was its own level of cringe. Part 1, the comments. Okay, I commented on the video by Sean about the BBC's transphobia, which you could check in the description of this video, that the BBC doesn't care about protecting women from sexual abuse. They only care about deep diving trans women. It's part of a multi-part series, and you should check it out. With the article, I did a whole video on it, and it's in the inclusion of a deranged Nazi Lily Kate, and how it proves that they are aimed at pitting lesbians against trans women. You can check it out in the description below. Anyways, here's what they replied, and I'm paraphrasing. Trans women, most of them white, are pushing cis women out of women's shelters. Okay, that is not only weaponizing women's shelters, but women of color. TERFs like to weaponize women's spaces, claiming that trans women are men who want to invade women's space and make them men's spaces. Then they commented, trans women are more marginalized than women of color and need those resources too. Trans women of color are even more marginalized. That is true, but there's no reasoning with someone who's already made up their mind. They dug their feet into the ground to call me the white supremacy patriarchy. They clearly don't see me as human, just some evil embodiment of racism and misogyny that needs to be destroyed, and the world will become a better place. All I was doing was saying that women fleeing abusive homes deserve resources, and yet I'm the embodiment of sexism. All I said was that minorities should not be left for dead, and I'm hatred incarnate. Now, let's look at their tactics. Part 2, TERF tactics. The main tactic they were running off was the divide and conquer tactic. The TERF ideology is built off dividing cis women and trans women so that they will infight while the patriarchy oppresses them both. Divide and conquer is a common tactic of bigots, where you pit two marginalized groups against one another, insisting that there can only be one winner so that they don't unite against a common enemy. The BBC has pitted cis lesbians against trans women by claiming that trans women are just men who want to seduce lesbians. Almost half of all trans women are the victims of rape themselves, and rape is more common when committed against marginalized groups, as it's not about getting a sexual kick but exerting power. And if a man wanted to rape a woman, would he go through all that effort of getting gender reconfirmation, which can take months, even years? No, he wouldn't. He'd just barge in there and do that. We can't give rapists that much credit. Would somebody who likes their privilege willingly make themselves a member of a marginalized group they most likely despise in order to violate members of said group? No, TERFs insist that giving trans people rights will somehow take rights from cis women, even though if you give rights to one group, all groups get more rights, and if you take rights from one group, you take rights from everybody. That is nothing but the truth. And if you want to keep trans women out of women's space, how would you police that? Do you have a gentle inspector outside of public bathrooms that would destroy any privacy bathrooms are supposed to provide? With the divide and conquer tactics of TERF, cis women are taught to see trans women as a threat, and trans women are made to mistrust cis women out of fears of false accusations. That way they will infight instead of working together to topple the patriarchy. This person here has pinned women of color against trans women, despite the fact that trans women of color exist. And in their world, a trans woman of color would be marginalized for her race or her trans identity. So whatever happens, her rights get taken away. While IRL, if you give rights to her for being a person of color, she doesn't lose any rights. And same if you give rights to her for being trans or being a woman. If she's in an abusive relationship, she's basically left for dead. But in reality, while trans women of color are marginalized in multiple fronts, If we work on one front, we will work on all the others. Black trans women are the most marginalized group in the West, and we need them to know that there's hope. If we continue campaigning with them for their rights, things will get better. Another tactic they use is flanderization, which is basically a variation of a strawman fallacy where you reduce the character of a person to a one-dimensional stereotype that's easy to attack. Instead of engaging with me and my points as a person, they reduce me to a monstrous caricature. Flanderization ticks me off as it refuses to engage with a target, but a larger-than-life flat version of him. If you're going to accuse me of being a flat character with no nuance, I'm not gonna engage with you anymore. Yes, I do admit that there are people who are lacking any character of in one trait, but those are few and far in between, and I don't really respect those shells of human beings. Flanderization ticks me off, as when you resort to flanderizing someone you don't like, it shows that you're too lazy and or spiteful to actually engage with them. Now I'm going to full counter them by exposing why TERFs are the real racist misogynists. Part 3. Tu-Koku. Yes, I know I'm resorting to a Tu-Koku logical fallacy, which is basically throwing the criticism back at the critic. Even though the criticism I am putting out is valid, not only do TERFs use the tactics of racists by claiming that the vulnerable minority is a threat to women in order for said vulnerable minority to waste their time and energy explaining that they are not a threat, while the real threat is both groups in the background, but some are full on racist, like the godmother of all turfdom, J.K. Rowling. Not only are POC characters flat and stereotypical enough to belong in a minstrel show, but if you equate wizards and witches to the queer community, Harry Potter is suddenly a heteronormative manifesto. Its lesson becomes minority groups need to live segregated from the majority, or else radical members of said minority will call for the majority to be persecuted like how the minority group has been historically and contemporarily persecuted. As a great man once said, the wise build bridges, fools build barriers. The only way to combat bigotry is through exposure to minorities, so people from the majority can understand their culture and realize that at the end of the day, we are all human. As long as the barriers are up and the bridges are built, ignorance and hate reign. In fact, Harry Potter is conservative of the fact that it favors the status quo, and the villains of this age are conservatives who are trying to keep everything the same, if not set society back. What I'm going to show you is proof that there's at least some terms that are racists. If you look at the links to the Reddit posts in the comments section below, and they're on the Gender Cynical subreddit, a subreddit dedicated to mocking terms and pointing out how they're conservatives in feminist clothing. The first image replaces a triangle of intersectionality on the left side of the LGBTQ plus pride flag with a penis, as not only the TERFs are equate trans people to a threat to women, but also people of color. Black men were historically portrayed as rapists, and black women were historically portrayed as unfeminine, to justify the subjugation of both women and people of color, and trans women are portrayed as unfeminine and a threat to women. So there's the fact that instead of being creative for just 1 second, TERFs recycle old-timey racist stereotypes and change the target demographic. And plus, there's a portrayal of trans men as lost lesbian sisters, groomed by the trans ideology into transitioning to escape the patriarchy. The patriarchy is harsh on trans men than on cis women, so it makes no sense why someone wanting to move up a social pecking order would transition from one marginalized group to an even more marginalized group. With the other image, yes, it's a transphobe comparing trans women existing as their true selves to blackface by putting on blackface themselves. That's a great level of mask off of them. And then there's a racist and sexist horror that is clocking. As one Redditor commented, there qualifies for clocking trans women as sharper jawlines, bigger ancestral rounder noses, bigger hands, etc., which doesn't only gatekeep white women who have these features, but are specifically features minority women are more likely to have. As for why clocking is sexist, it's basically making fun of women's bodies, which TERFs are way too fond of to be considered feminist. While I'm not saying that POC TERFs don't exist, I have run into at least one on the internet They tend to look the other way when racism in the TERF community is brought up, because they're too busy shitting on people of less privileges than they do to care that they are hanging out with white supremacists who are minimizing and participating in the harm done to their communities. Same with lesbian TERFs, who look the other way when the homophobia thrown at them by the foul transphobes to act on their transphobic whims, and TERFs will more or less call you a real bigot for speaking out against bigotry, which is really telling. In conclusion, the TERF movement is built on white, rich, heterosexual privilege and to pretend it's not, and that the other side is, that's grasping at straws. TERFism isn't feminism, not at all. Tyson out, and please remember to like, subscribe, and share for more content.